Welcome to the Living Out podcast, helping people, churches and society talk about faith and sexuality.
Hello and welcome to the Living Out podcast, your go-to podcast for conversations around faith and sexuality. My name is Andrew and I'm really pleased today to be joined by my friend and colleague, Mr. Andy Robinson. How are you doing, Andy?
I'm fine, Mr. Andrew Bunt. Good to see you.
It's lovely to have you here. Andy, we are, so I understand, mid the Euros, the football tournament. We've just got into the final, I think. I imagine somehow you're enjoying this. I'm trying to draw in different type of audience to my normal banter here. I imagine you're enjoying the football, Andy.
I am amazed you've heard of it, because presumably they don't talk about the Euros much on sort of musical podcasts and so on. So no, I'm delighted to see you embracing a different cultural phenomenon. I am enjoying it. To be honest, it's slightly fraying my nerves because as we're recording it, England have just won the semi-final, but they've they've been behind in their last three games, on the edge of going out, and finally came back. So I don't know. Imagine, something really suspenseful after the end of Act 1, and you don't know what's going to happen. Is that putting it in the right sort of language for you?
Thank you. Yeah. Transposing it to my. I really thank you. A bit of kind of cultural translation from there. Well, I am aware the Euros is happening. I actually really like things like the Euros and World Cup.
This is going to be awful, isn't it?
The reason being, while the matches are on, the world is beautifully quiet. It's the best time to go out and do stuff when England are playing, because everywhere's quiet. So I always go to the gym. The time the gym is quietest is when England is playing an international match in a big tournament. So I went last night, it was beautifully quiet.
Sorry, what sort of gym is it that isn't showing the England game simultaneously? This is no gym I want to be part of.
Well, no, there's no TVs at my gym, which is also great, I think. Yeah, no, so it's a top tip for anyone who doesn't like football. Get out of the house, go somewhere that's quiet, because everyone else is watching the football. It's great, love it.
Good. Well, I guess by the time this goes out, the final will have happened, so people will know,
true,
whether I'm happy or not. And you've probably there'll be even fewer people out during the final, Andrew. So you can do whatever you like to your heart's content.
I am making my plans already. Well, we should keep going. We have got a wonderful guest with us today. We are joined by Katherine to hear some of her story, because in this series, we are chatting to people who are new to the podcast, hearing their stories, digging into some topics related to their experiences. And Katherine is our guest today. Katherine, thanks so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure to have you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
And are you enjoying the Euros?
I mean, I'm like you, Andrew. I'm not that bothered by football.
Oh, good.
But what I do enjoy is how it brings people together. So last night we had our church packed out with people from across our meetings, which was awesome. And so we go to Wetherspoons every Sunday after church with all the students. We even had the manager of Wetherspoons and his wife come along to watch the football in church. She's never been to our church before. So as an evangelist, I was very excited by that.
That is brilliant. He's avoiding his own establishment being too busy that night, but that is wonderful.
Yeah.
Praise God for that.
And can I say, I bet he wouldn't have come to see a sort of musical being shown live. So I just think football brings people together. I think it's good news, Katherine.
There is a Wetherspoons somewhere, Tunbridge Wells or something, which is a converted opera house.
Yeah.
And every year they put on opera, which I really want to go and see that in Wetherspoons.
It's awesome. I've not been to the opera, but the Wetherspoons is epic. It's like the most beautiful Wetherspoons I've ever been to. Opera house. It's amazing. So, yeah.
We'll find out when the opera's on, Katherine, and we'll go.
Great.
Should I explain to anybody outside the UK, Wetherspoons is a form of public house?
It's a fine dining restaurant, actually. So if you're ever in the UK, please do experience Wetherspoons.
Yeah. But other restaurants and pubs are available. We should probably say that. Well, we're going to hear Katherine's story in this podcast. But just as a starter, Katherine, just give us a quick intro to yourself, maybe kind of who you are, what you do, where you're based.
Yeah, I'm based in a place called Sidcup, which is in southeast London. We've got 2 drama schools here, which is how I ended up in Sidcup. I studied at drama school, so me and Andrew love chatting about theatre and all of that. And I work for the Evangelical Alliance, whose aim is to unite the church so that Jesus can be made known across the UK. And I'm working on a project called Being Human, which is looking at the massive question of what does it mean to be human and all the different hot button issues that come up with that and how we share faith in our culture today.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, we are thrilled you're here and looking forward to hearing your story.
Great, Catherine. Let's get into your story then. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how your romantic feelings, sexual attractions developed? When did you become aware of experiencing same-sex attraction?
So I don't have the story as some people do of knowing when they were 5 or 6 that they were same-sex attracted. That wasn't my experience. I think my story with sexuality was probably a bit more complex. I had a lot more questions, maybe some confusion, and it probably wasn't until I was in my teenage years. I just, fell in love with my best friend, and we started dating. So I was about 15 years old, and so she also liked me, and we started dating. And then it was from there, then when I was in that relationship, that then I looked back on my life and I thought, oh, were those moments that was same-sex attraction that I wouldn't have known about? Like, was that a moment when I would have known that I was gay? Like, I remember being at sleepovers and from speaking to other girls, and not all of these girls are now gay, but would kiss girls at sleepovers and thought, well, we're practicing for the boys. I haven't had my first kiss yet, but I'd kissed loads of girls. And so looking back on that, then as a teenager, I thought, well, I think those were moments that could have helped me to realise that this was a thing in my life. But maybe I wasn't ready to accept it or to realise it or want to admit that. And then being in that relationship, I then as a teenager was like, this is my life. I cannot imagine dating a guy. Like I'm in this relationship, and this is all I can imagine my life looking like. So that's sort of my journey with same-sex attraction.
And at that point, you weren't a Christian. How did your interest in Christian things develop? How did you actually become a Christian?
Yeah, I definitely wasn't a Christian at that point. I was raised in an atheist home, so atheist in name, but not in practice. They had very eclectic sort of spirituality, and my parents were super superstitious. So, my mum would never walk under a ladder, never step on cracks in the road. If you smash a mirror, that's it, you're cursed, that type of stuff. But I hadn't really thought about Jesus or church. I thought about the universe and spirituality, but never specifically Jesus. But the girl that I dated, her parents were evangelical Christians.
Wow.
So I sort of first bumped up against Christianity through dating her, and so heard stories about prayer and Jesus, and they'd read the Bible as a family. And she had left church quite dramatically because of the question of sexuality, and not because she'd really heard anything about it, but more because there was silence around it, and she just felt that this is a no-go area. I can't talk about it. This is something that is just, I feel shame around, and it's their fault. And there was a lot of mess. And when she had come out to her parents, there was sort of a silence around it, like, let's not talk about it. But I think it was just because they didn't really know what to say themselves. They just were like, we don't know what to do with this. We hadn't imagined this happening. So that was bubbling around me. But at the same time, I was very intrigued by her family, because I saw something in her family that I'd never experienced before. And I linked that to their faith. I was like, the way that her parents love their kids and love each other is just so beautiful and so different. And I would have never told them that. But I did have those reflections. I was like, this is really beautiful. And then it wasn't until quite a few years on. So we dated for about 3.5 years. And then she broke up with me. I was absolutely heartbroken. And then through a series of other events and grief and things like that, I started to really look into Christianity for myself. And the pinnacle turning point for me was I had a friend very suddenly die, and he was a Christian as well. And before he died, he was completely at peace. And that was another moment for me that I went, this isn't just a series of rules that people are aligning to. This isn't just a thing that parents are putting on their children to get them to conform to some sort of social norm. This transformed someone's experience of the hardest thing anyone could ever go through, which is facing death as a young person. And I would be terrified if I was in that situation. So that made me very serious about looking into Christianity and the claims of Jesus and what I found online, I was sort of convinced by. I was like, I kind of want this to be true. Like, if this is it, I kind of want it to be true, but I'm not sure it is. And I decided to try praying, and I prayed for the thing that I wanted most, which was joy, and experienced joy. And that was enough to convince me that God was real. Just that experience of joy and Googling.
Oh, that's amazing. I love hearing stories like that. I mean, was wrestling with Christianity and sexuality, was that part of what you were thinking through, or did that come subsequently to becoming a Christian?
I think very early days when I was first introduced to Christianity, it was a huge question for me. And because I was very protective over my girlfriend, so I was like, Christians are awful, like they are hateful, they're bigoted, or the Christians that she's surrounded with are reading the Bible wrong, and they're just choosing to use the Bible in that way. So that was my first thought. And then when I then went through like heartbreak and grief, my then search for God wasn't from a place of, I need to figure out the answer to this question. It was, how am I going to like survive life? Because this is just hard, and I feel so sad and so lost that I will take anything to help. And I tried the like other routes of alcohol and drugs and all of that, and that had made it worse. So I was like, those are quick fixes that haven't worked. Yeah. So I need something deeper, and if my friend who died could be at peace, maybe this could help me as well. And I didn't really consider the question. I hadn't forgotten those things, but it wasn't a big thing at that moment when I was searching. I was like, I'll figure it out. I'm sure it will be fine. So then it was afterwards when I'd become a Christian that then I had all of the questions, I'm sure. And all of the wrestles, and
And how did you come to the conclusion that, I don't know, the Christian life wasn't going to involve a same-sex relationship? Was that an easy conclusion to come to? Did that take time after you'd become a Christian?
I remember after becoming a Christian and then talking to a friend who was a Christian, who had sort of known my whole story, because I'd been at drama school with her in the UK, so she'd definitely seen my life before as a Christian, and she was so excited that I'd become a Christian. And I remember saying to her, like, just to be clear, like, this doesn't mean that I'm like not going to date girls. Like, that is not, like, that doesn't mean that. And she was like, well, we'll see. I don't know. We'll see. And I was like, no, that's so offensive. But for me, I think it was just as I read the Bible for myself, to be honest. Because I'd heard lots about the Bible, and I'd heard different things that people thought, they'd pull apart Leviticus and be like, look, Christians follow these bits, but not these bits. And I was like, oh yeah, that seems really dumb. But then as I was reading just the Gospels, really, and just the words of Jesus, I just felt this, I think I can't describe it other than a deep sense of conviction. And it wasn't just around, like, how I was expressing my sexuality. It was around so many other things of just conviction and invitation from Jesus. So it didn't feel like a heavy thing of like, this awful whatever, but it was just that invitation of follow me, like follow me with everything, like trust me with everything. And I think it took me a long time to be able to articulate my theology around it. And I think it was easier for me to come to the conclusion of this is what it looks like for me to follow God, and for me to live a pure, obedient life is to do this. I think the wrestle that I had that was much more challenging was, what about my friends that I'm sharing faith with who are in the LGBT community? Like, does that mean that's what that means for them to follow Jesus as well? So I think that was the harder thing for me, actually, because I'd tried my way and lived out, I just lived how I wanted to live, and it hadn't worked. I was like, even if it means being single, or even if it means never partying again, or whatever it is, I want to follow Jesus. But yes, the harder wrestle was, what does that mean for everyone else? But it was through reading the Bible for me, really, that I got clarity, and I was like, no, it's clear. This is the way, and I want His way.
That makes so much sense. I think for me, as I speak on this subject, as I try and live it out for myself, that the big Bible passages aren't actually, in the end, the passages about sexuality, but they're things like Jesus saying, as you deny yourself for me, that's how you're going to find true life. And so the teaching about sexuality comes within that overall framework. And I don't know, that's been the thing that's helped me most. And probably it's helped me as I've taught others, actually, in saying it isn't just you've got these random passages about sexuality. Actually, for all of us, whoever we are, following Jesus will mean giving stuff up that's quite precious to us, but it's worth it. And so there's so much there in your story I can empathise with. But if I can move on in your story, because I believe you're now married. Indeed, I've met your husband. So talk us through that. How did that happen?
Yeah, great question. Well, he asked me to marry him and I said yes. So that's how that happened. But the deeper question behind that question, as a teenager, if we went back and had 16-year-old Katherine on this call and said, right, you're going to be married to a man, my jaw would have dropped and I would have been like, what? That's crazy. No, that's weird. I don't want that. But I think when I became a Christian and started to follow Jesus, my relationship to my sexuality just became more nuanced. So it wasn't a God changed my sexuality or anything like that. I definitely don't want to communicate that. But it wasn't the core element of my identity as it was when I was a teenager. That it was how I would introduce myself and define myself to people. I'm a lesbian, that's who I am. And I loved being part of that community as well. But when I became a Christian, I was a Christian. And as it became a less of a core part of like how I defined myself, I then experienced a nuance in my sexuality. And then as I looked back on my life, I thought, you know what, actually, there were times when I was younger that I had crushes on guys. So I don't think my sexuality was as black and white when I wasn't a Christian as I thought it was when I was a teenager. I think it's always been complex and confusing and messy and grey. So that's how I reflected on sexuality afterwards. And then me and John were friends for a really long time before we started dating, and that was helpful for me because I think as well the way that a lot of women anyway, experience attraction is very different to men. And so I know when I talk to my husband, he knows straight away who he's attracted to in a room. So he can go, yeah, that, whereas that is just not my experience. I don't experience attraction in that way. It's much more emotional. It takes a much longer time. So when I first met John, I didn't think, cool, what a guy. It took, I thought he was great and like we were wonderful friends, but it took a long time then for that to develop into something more. So I think for me, and I think for many women, sexuality and attraction is probably just a bit more complex and nuanced, and there's more questions. I think for some women who are my friends, it's very, very clear for them, and they would experience attraction in a way where they definitely know all the time. Whereas, for me, it's just not that.
Yeah, I love that story in so many ways. Partly just the shift in identity that happens when somebody becomes a Christian, but also that awareness sexuality is way more nuanced than we sometimes think, and that's just been so helpful. Thanks so much, Katherine.
It's time to prepare for polyamory. That's the message behind Andrew's new book, 3 or More, Reflections on Polyamory and Consensual Non-Monogamy. Polyamory, romantic and sexual relationships involving 3 or more people, is fast becoming accepted in modern Western society. How have we reached this point? What does the Bible say? And how should the church respond? Andrew explores these questions and more in the hope of helping the church prepare to engage well. Get your copy of 3 or More at grovebooks.co.uk.
Katherine, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's been really great to hear that. I'd love also to talk about a piece you've written for us, something people could go and read on the Living Up website. You've written a great blog around the importance of stories, especially actually for connecting with younger generations. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about why you think stories are so important, particularly in our connecting with younger generations.
Yeah, I think two reasons. One, Jesus is the master storyteller. He told loads of stories. I love just reading Jesus's interactions with people. And there are so many moments where Jesus could have just said, this is what God is like. Like, that's it, done. This is what the kingdom of heaven is like. Boom, one sentence. And everyone would have gone home. And they would have been, that's it. But instead, Jesus always and often takes the time to tell really good stories, ordinary stories that connect to people's hearts, that explain extraordinary heavenly things. And I think if we're following the way of Jesus, we need to follow the way that he tells stories and be creative in how we tell stories, to explain who God is to people, to explain what the kingdom of heaven is like to people. So I think that's one. And then two, just around testimonies. I know for me, it took me years and years and years to share my testimony, because I hadn't heard any stories like mine. And I just felt like if I share, everyone's going to view me differently. I'm going to lose friends. People are going to think I'm strange. And I experienced so much shame. And if I'd heard a story like mine, I would have probably shared sooner. And so that is why I'm now sharing my story, because I want to pave the way for more girls to share theirs. Because I'm always just so blown away whenever I do share how many women come up to me and they're like, I've actually got the same story, or I actually have the same experience, or I've never told anyone this. And I just think our stories and our vulnerability are powerful in bringing freedom in people's lives. So I think it's the one, reaching a younger generation through sharing stories, using ordinary experiences to share what God is like, what the kingdom of God is like, but then also sharing vulnerably to show them, hey, you can share the fullness of your story. You can show up and share what you're struggling with, what you're going through. And it's okay. We're not scared of those big questions and these big topics.
Yeah, it's great, which actually in a lovely way chimes with the heart of why Living Out launched the Who We Still Try to Be. Actually, stories are the heart of what we do. Exactly that thing, trying to show people you're not alone, it is safe to talk about these things. Jesus has got good news to speak into your story, and here are examples of that. And one of the reasons for this series, I guess, as well. And I've heard people say as well with younger generations are particularly conscious of and interested in authenticity, people kind of being real, and also in seeing how the Christian faith would actually make a difference to kind of real life experiences. And I know you work with young people a lot. Is that something you've seen and experienced in sharing your own story and just experiencing what young people are looking for?
Oh, definitely. I think there are so many stories that they're hearing in the world around them and in the culture around them. And often we've gone in as Christians with like the facts and the stats and the truth, which is good. We need truth. But we often have held back on the story and the experience and actually what it looks like to live the better story, to live the way of Jesus, how it's been good news. And so they've got all of these stories from the world that are going, this is actually great, this is that, which isn't to do with like logic really, it's just a load of stories. And that's far more compelling to a generation than us going in with like a black and white thing. It's the truth, but with the story and with the grace and all of that. So yeah, I think what you guys do at Living Out is wonderful, and it's been so helpful for my life personally when I was years ago contemplating should I share my story or not. I remember watching your stories on your website and just thinking, oh, I could never do that. That's so scary, but I'm so glad they're doing it. That's great. And here we are, so...
Brilliant, yeah, here we are. We're very grateful for that. Well, thank you, that's really encouraging to hear, thank you. And you mentioned there the concept of kind of a better story, which we often talk about here as well. At the end of your blog, and encourage people to go and read, you talk about the better story and how actually God requires us to lay down every part of our lives in submission to him, but that's part of his better story for us. And I guess I wanted to ask you, if someone pushes back on that and says to you, they hear some of your life story and say, do you really believe it's better? Has it really been better? And those who kind of from the outside struggle to see how it's better, what do you say in response to those kind of comments and questions?
Yeah, firstly, it's like when I met Jesus, it was like Jesus says that he is the light of the world, that whoever follows him will not walk in darkness but will know the light of life. And that is my story. It was like I was walking in darkness and I didn't even really know it. I didn't know the depths of the darkness that I was existing in. And then when I met Jesus, it was like, whoa, I'm seeing light for the first time, colour for the first time. This is crazy. And what I experienced in him, the joy and the peace and the love in him, was so much greater than any of the cost that it was to me. And that isn't when you become a Christian, life is easy and absolutely fine. I've been reading Psalm 23 recently and just reflecting on how we often focus on the first bit of the psalm about God being the good shepherd who leads us to green pastures and quiet waters, who restores our soul. And then we often don't really focus on the next bit, which is God also leads us to the valley of the shadow of death. But he leads us through it. So I feel like when I wasn't a Christian, I experienced real valleys and shadows of death and all of that, and it was terrifying. But as a Christian, I've been through really hard things, really tragic things that have shocked me, that have been destabilizing, but God has been with me and he's walked with me through it, and that is a totally different experience. And I wouldn't want to do anything to lose that. I wouldn't want to do anything to lose him, because he's just so much greater. And yeah, even if I'm not able to live out all of the things that my heart would go, you want this, and your emotions go, do this, Jesus has been so much better than all of those things.
What you're saying there reminds me of a psalm that comes not long after, although I can't off the top of my head remember which number it is, where it talks about tasting and seeing that the Lord is good. The idea that actually it's sometimes not until you step into this that actually you experience the reality. And sometimes that's what I say to people about the better story. I get that from the outside you might not see it, but it's something that to some extent you can't know it's better until you begin to experience. You have to taste and see the goodness of God in what he says. And sometimes actually it's that challenge to take that step of faith. Well, what if you try this? See actually what God says, if what God says is good. And you mentioned there about kind of some of the difficulties, struggles in life, and sometimes those are because of this kind of clash between our desires and the direction they're trying to lead us and our commitment to Jesus and the direction we want to go in. Any more advice for people just how you kind of handle those tensions, which could be around sexuality, could be around all kind of things actually, how we handle just the pain that can come from the tensions between our desires leading us away from Jesus and actually his call to follow him?
Yeah, I think that's the experience of every single Christian. And for Christians that experience same-sex attraction, it's not limited to same-sex attraction that we experience that tension. So I think if we were to isolate that just to a small minority of people, it's like, no, that's a Christian life. Oh, there's so many ways that I often get distracted and my eyes turn away from God and I have to return to him. But that's why I'm just so grateful for the grace of God. Jesus always welcomes me back with forgiveness, and that I don't have to do a load of stuff to earn back my good standing with God, but actually he's open-armed and welcomes us back. But for all of us, there's always a tension between what the heart wants, what the emotions say, and the way of Jesus. And part of following him is increasingly having our desires and our feelings shaped into more Christ-likeness. And hopefully when I'm 70, I'll be more like Jesus than I am now, and I'll be struggling less. Or when I'm Andy's age, I'll just be like floating on a cloud. I'll just be like floating around.
That was perfect.
I'm offended mortally.
Sorry.
Don't worry, I'm not.
Are you floating around, Andy?
I just see you as just this holy,
Thank
you're
you.
just holy, Andy.
You're digging yourself out of that well, Katherine. Well done.
No, I agree with Katherine. We genuinely aspire to be like you and look up to you, Andy. You're a role model for us. Well, you've mentioned there your older self, Katherine. I want to ask a last question, think about your younger self. Any kind of words of wisdom, advice, encouragement that if you had the chance to, you would say to your younger self?
Oh, yeah. Whenever I think about like young Christian Katherine, I'm just like, oh, my heart. I just remember like writing in my journal, like, I'll never share this, and like I hate this part of my story, I hate this, I'm this, and just all this shame. And it wasn't even that Christians had put that on me, it was just all me and my fear of what people would think. And I would just encourage myself, you can share this, it will be okay. Some people won't respond great, but you will feel so much better when you tell someone. And some people will surprise you and respond in beautiful, gracious, loving ways, and will help you so much. So I just encourage myself to share my story way before I did, and to not feel like everyone was going to look at me like I was an alien when I did, because thankfully the church really didn't. I had a few weird interactions with people, but on the whole, it was hugely positive and so freeing. So, yeah.
Well, that's brilliant to hear, and great words to close on. Katherine, thank you so much for being with us, for sharing your story, being so honest to us, sharing some wisdom. It's been lovely to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more, hear more from Katherine at the Evangelical Alliance website, and also her blog written for us. We'll stick some links to all of those things in the show notes. That's it for today, but do join us again in 2 weeks' time. We'll have another story from a new guest to the podcast. And don't forget, in the meantime, give us a review. Let people know how much you like the Living Out podcast. Why not send this on WhatsApp to someone you think it would encourage them, share it with someone, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll be back soon, but bye for now.